mean, I grew up on a farm, and when I came to West Cork 20 years ago, we bought a small farm with a milk quota, and I milked cows for 10 or 15 years, and then it was too small. It was, I'd only like 9,000 gallon quota, so it was really silly, and I stopped milking cows and just started milking the system really as best I could. And I got involved with Growing Awareness, who at the time were running a conference. Around the time I stopped milking cows, yes, was the time they ran the first conference, which was on genetic engineering. And I'd always farmed organically, so I was, you know, a bit of a hippie really. And I got involved with the conference on GM foods without really having a strong opinion on GM foods, but by the end of it I did have a strong anti-GM feeling, and not so much that GM foods were the devil incarnate, but that the people doing the genetic engineering were doing it not for to feed the world, but to fill their own pockets, and that it was going to seriously damage ordinary farming. And then we got involved in the second conference, which was about the globalization of food. And after that, we started a couple of practical projects. We thought we should do something practical. Running conferences was all very well, but it wasn't really a very practical way to save the world. And so we thought we'd do a number of things. One was start the farmers market, which is another whole story, so that farmers doing things locally could market there. Well, one of the slightly dangerous things now for a cattle producer is that, you know, I'm still producing cattle, but I was talking to the lorry driver that collects them, and he was saying people used to ring up the various factories and say, how much are you paying for cattle? And then they would have a choice of who they sent the cattle to. Now what you do is you ring the lorry driver and you say, will you take them somewhere? And the lorry drivers are all kind of agents for the factories, and you know, it's not a very open market. I mean, obviously you can always take them to the mart and take what you get, but even inside the marts, it's a circle of people controlling the buying, and they're buying for the very small number of factories which maybe aren't price fixing, but it sometimes seems like it. And farmers have very few choices where they sell their produce, and the farmers market was our attempt at that. And we also tried to start a seed saver group, which didn't really take off, but I was rather intrigued with the idea, and as I did save some seeds anyway in the garden, I started bringing them into the farmers market because I didn't have much else to bring. And since then really farming has just gone downhill. Nobody's actually making a profit from producing food and selling it. Well, certainly not a very big one, or not anyone that I know. People who are doing things like producing an end product, like making cheese, and doing the marketing themselves, or direct selling in markets, are turning some sort of profit. But people doing the standard things, going to the creamery with milk, well, milk has improved a bit lately. But for over the last 10 years, really, the price of milk hasn't changed, the price of beef hasn't changed, and the cost of producing it really has. And the whole farming community is very depressed, and it's kind of addicted to payments. You know, now you don't say, I wonder what kind of food would sell. What will I produce as a farmer? You go, what will I get a grant for? And then you think, oh, well, oh God, if I got sheep, well, I'd have to apply for a new flock number, and I'd have to change my reps plan, and I'd have to, I couldn't even think about buying a few sheep again. You know, you have to register. I have 2 chickens now, and I haven't registered them with the Department of Agriculture. There's so much red tape and so much bureaucracy, and particularly if you're organic, that it's really, you know, it puts people off just spontaneously saying, I must try growing potatoes. You have to have a license to sell potatoes now. And what ridiculous. Farming is just nonsense at the moment. And well, anyway, that's my view of farming at the moment. And also, when you look at, if you were to look at the country of Ireland as a farm, in fact, what we've got is like a big field, if you like, with cattle on it. Some part of it is for producing meals that are basically fed to the animals. We're buying in lots more meals from outside the world. A lot of soya from South America, where all the poor people don't even have enough to eat, and they're selling us soya beans to feed our cattle. And then we're selling the beef to Iraq so that we can have their oil and so on. And it's all just not making any sense anymore. And it strikes me that it actually reflects our whole kind of behaviour as a country, that we feel that we're part of the rich West. We don't have to work very hard. It's okay for the poor people in the hot countries to produce our food, and that we will do important things like export software and pharmaceuticals that only rich people can have anyway. And we're addicted to oil. We're all driving around. Here we are all, well, I certainly drove further than anyone tonight. We're all driving around like mad in our cars and burning central heating oil and each having a house of our own. And we've actually got to start thinking a bit, well, you know how we have to start thinking. We've got to stop consuming so much and start living what De Valera called lives of frugal comfort. Which sounds really boring, doesn't it? You know, try selling that as a politician, you know, that we should all just live frugally and comfortably, and who needs more than 2 pairs of shoes every year? And, do you know, anyway. But I think we have to look at the priorities, our priorities as individuals, and that sort of expands out to our priorities as a society. And at the moment, we seem to be fairly, as a society, consumed with wealth and being rich and having fast cars and but actually what we really want just is to have enough, and for our children to have enough and to be comfortable and to have a nice life. And in fact we all ended up working far too fast. And if we want to sort of extrapolate our aims for ourselves to the rest of the world, we'd need a number of planets to do it on. So if we're going to be realistic and not expect not expect to have any more than the rest of the world, then we do have to think in a much smaller scale, that we aren't going to have 3 jetting away holidays in the year, and we're not going to have a new car very often or ever. And if we want everybody on the planet to have a nice life, and we also want there to be enough room for all the other species on the planet, we have to compromise quite a lot. And we have to look at the cost, really, of everything we do in terms of oil, in terms of money, in terms of damage to the planet. But just going back to the individual, how can we actually produce enough food for ourselves without costing the planet too much? And the answer is vegetables. You know, what else can you grow for yourself to have a varied and tasty diet and not have to have an awful lot of space for? And vegetables is it. I was trying to work out on the way up in the car, you know, how much land I thought I could grow enough vegetables to feed myself on. And well, my thinking is that I would imagine, I don't know, and I'd love to try it, that I could grow enough to feed myself on about 1/10 of an acre.
Yeah, I see.
Would you say so? Yeah? I mean, when you think if you were to get 10 tons of potatoes to an acre, for instance, and 1/10 of an acre, that gives you a ton of potatoes. That's a lot. And then if you have other things, I mean, I'd imagine you're talking 1/10 of an acre.
At most, I think.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. And I'm very influenced at the moment by this book by Charles Dowding, which Jean Perry lent me at Christmas. Said, you have to read this gardening book. And I went, oh God, I've read gardening books. I don't need really more gardening books. But he's a guy who was growing vegetables intensively for commercially. He had about 1 acre, and he was selling an incredible amount of veg off this 1 acre, which he did all by hand and no digging. You know, he essentially had slightly raised beds, no borders around them, just raised up with, you know, clearing the paths up onto the beds, and making lots of compost, composting it all the time, just laying the compost on the top, and then growing plants in modules and poking them into the top, and just keeping things weeded. And that would be very much the direction I'm trying to go with the garden.